I mean, my best definition of Highlife is to say that it was a music that was created in Ghana out of a combination of African, Western and Black American elements, or music of the Black Americas and Caribbean. And it comes in various packages and has become an umbrella term in Ghana for all its popular music. So, you know, from the word Highlife in the context of the rich, elite dance orchestras, it became an umbrella term. So you can play guitar band Highlife, even though originally it was called Osubisaba. Or you can have hip-hop Highlife, hip life, or gospel Highlife. So it's become a general term, but and also it's found in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, they've added Igbo and Yoruba and Edo elements into Highlife making. So if you listen to Nigerian Highlife, they may not use the Ghanaian rhythms, they might have their own distinct Igbo rhythms. The first thing to take into account is that the concert parties and the guitar bands themselves have completely different origins, and they never really came together until Ike Nyami formed the Akan Trio in 1950. So before that, we had what we call, and he also invented the guitar band, which he did. You see, before him, we had some people like Apia Ajukum and then the Kumasi Trio and different groups. But they played basically what we might call palm wine music, acoustic guitar, without any Western drums or, you know, it was mainly local percussion and the guitar. So that was on the one hand. So we had the palm wine or the Adonson or the Osubisaba that we were talking about earlier. This was what we tend to call it palm wine music because it's acoustic. And then the concert parties are completely separate, altogether separate. They were formed originally by Ghanaians copying American and British music hall and vaudeville shows, which was based around ragtime music and tap dancing. And the first concert parties were formed for the elites in Accra and Cape Coast. It was staged in English. There were no traditional folkloric elements in it. And they based they even used the blackface, the makeup with the white around the lips, which they borrowed from blackface comics. And it was introduced to Ghana by some black Americans in the 1920s, and also movies, early movies. Anyway, what happened is there was a guy called Bob Johnson who took the concert party, which was very westernized, into the villages in the 1930s and indigenized it, put it into Fanti, because he was a Fanti. He introduced Kwaku Anansi not as a spider, but as a human being in the plays, but he had all the characteristics of Kwaku Anansi. In other words, he was a hero who you admire, but he's also mischievous. So the Bob character, and so these concert parties then became touring groups, but they toured not with Highlife music, they toured with ragtime music and foxtrots. They maintained that character. Even when I first joined a concert party in the 60s, the Jaguar Jokers were still playing ragtime music to some extent, but in the 20s and 30s it was mainly imported ragtime music, but they had brought in the Ghanaian languages and also Ghanaian folk characters. So that's what Bob Johnson does, or did. So he's a national hero for doing this. But then Ike Nyami, who had already formed the first guitar band around about he had played with a band called Apia Ajukum, and he later formed Ike's guitar band, which started to use Western instruments, like a dance band, but no trombones or trumpets. So he didn't call his music palm wine, because it was more developed, if you can put it that way. So he formed a concert party, and so that he was so successful that every concert party grabbed a guitar band, and every guitar band formed a concert party. Whether it's Onyina, Yamwa, Kekeku, they all formed concert parties. So since then, the two art forms became entwined. So you could say that Bob Johnson started the indigenization of the concert party through the language and the Nancy type of character, and that Ike Nyame finalized the Africanization by replacing ragtime music with highlife music. So basically the concert party became a highlife opera backed by a guitar band. So that's from the, and we had many, I've estimated that we, from the 1950s to 1980s, when things got rough in Ghana for the music industry, we had about 250 concert parties operating in the country. Nana Ampedu, African Brothers, he had a concert party. They all had concert parties, so the two became equivalent, and we had about 250 of these, not all operating at the same time, but maybe any one time, at least 100. So the concert party guitar band sector was bigger than the dance band sector. The dance bands between the 50s and 80s were about 150. Guitar band concert parties were 250. So which is the bigger? You see what I mean? It was the major, and what happened is with the collapse of the music industry, the live music industry, with the curfews, the military coups, you know, a Champong, was it Akufo, and then Rawlings, number 1 and number 2, the concert parties and the guitar bands were grounded. So and everything changed. But by that time, some of the concert parties had already gone on television, or Bra, or Sofo Dadsi, and these things. I don't know if you know about these, you know, Grace Amabu and all these things. So you could say that from the concert party, even though the concert party itself, we only have maybe about 5 or 10 left in the whole country, and they're all in Kumasi now. That whole thing collapsed because of the military era, the hardships and so on. But a lot of that, the ideas behind the concert parties, the plots, even some of the actors and actresses moved first of all into television in the 80s, and then into Kumawood movies. So I'm not saying that all the concert party people were able to find occupation in film, but it did provide some with an avenue. I'm sure if you look at some of the concert party actors or the film actors, they got some of their training in a concert party. So I would go as far as saying that in terms of Highlife, the biggest and most important sector of Highlife in Ghana was not the dance bands. Dance bands became very well recognized internationally because they traveled. But it was in Ghana itself, it was the guitar band and the concert parties. Because they went, look, take a typical concert party. On the end of the month, when everybody gets their money, or the cocoa money is in, or your salary is in, the guitar band concert parties, they go on the road for 3 weeks solid, 1, 2, 3. I mean, I used to travel with them. It's very hard work. And then they will only break at the end of the month for maybe when the people's money is run out. So if you multiply that by 12, like, okay, you look at the number of performances that a typical guitar band or concert party did compared to a dance band. A dance band maybe play once or twice a week, maybe. But a guitar band was on the road every day. So they also provide the most professionalized sector of the popular music of Ghana, because they were playing more. They were more than they were playing for 3-4 hours every day. They were integrating music and drama, which the dance bands never did. The dance bands never worked with concert parties. So and one of my great sadnesses as a university lecturer at Levon is that the concert party was never fully endorsed by the university, excluding for the work of F.O. Sutherland, who was an extraordinary person in her own right. The drama theatre arts tends to sort of do black versions of Shakespeare, African versions of Shakespeare, or it does what they call music for development, or theatre for development, which itself draws on concert parties to some extent, like humour, using humour to sensitize people about problems. But basically they consider it to be a very low-grade form of music, slapstick comedy, and it couldn't really be fully integrated into the academy. And it's a very sad thing that this happened, because the concert party and actors and the guitar band musicians probably were probably the greatest segment of the popular music, professional music industry. And their music got everywhere. Look at Nigeria. In the 70s, so many, when the things got tough in Ghana, many Ghanaian guitar bands went to Nigeria. They left the concert parties behind, but they went, you know, Okuku Sekou and all these people went over to Nigeria. So I'm not saying this because I first met Ghanaian Highlife as a concert party musician. You know, I didn't start with the dance bands or the pop bands. I started with the concert party. But I noticed that the university really looked down. They didn't mind the dance bands too much for their student dances. But you know, the students would never bring in a guitar band in the 50s or 60s into the university because of their association with concert parties and sleeping on the floor and palm wine drinking. It was only Nketia and my father and a few other people who formed a special club in the 1950s called the African Music Society at Legon that catered for guitar band musicians like Kekeku, Yamwa and Onyina, but the students didn't patronize it. They only wanted to see E.T. Mensah or the Uhurus, people wearing suit and tie, back in those days. It's different now, but there was a very big difference between the two types of music. But having said everything and looking back through the history of these two types of high life, there were more guitar bands and concert parties, far more than there were dance bands. And their music was proverbial. They carried a lot of proverbial information in their songs. I mean, one only has to think about African Brothers, you know, Abitie and all these songs. You use proverbs. You do find this to some extent with the dance bands, but the dance bands were more westernized. But they because they were more westernized, they became more internationalized. So outside of Ghana, everybody's heard of E.T. Mensah, but very few people have heard of Kakeku. Especially, you know, it's the way, it's rather unfortunate that's happened. But as I said, in the end, the two wings of High Life, the guitar bands and the dance bands, they came together under the umbrella of the Musicians Union of Ghana. So I'm only talking about historical matters. If an American is asking me to define what is jazz, then I will say, what type of jazz? New Orleans, you know, bebop, hard bop, free jazz, and so on and so on. So, and even if you can find some commonalities in the different varieties of jazz, you have to take into account that there are many types of jazz. So it's quite difficult to talk about what is high life because there are many types of high life. But I could pull out a few commonalities between them. And one is the rhythm. And there are three rhythms that are very common in high life music. Maybe I can use this as a drum and show you. One is what I often call the calypso rhythm because it was also played by West Indian soldiers when they came to Ghana. It's this one. This is the foot movements and this is the bell. Ga, 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 ga. Everybody knows it. We know it as Palogo, we know it as High Life. If you go to Trinidad, they call it Calypso. If you go to Cuba, they call it Afro-Cuban or Rumba rhythms, played usually by the bell. So this is one of the original rhythms in High Life. But it's not a particularly Ghanaian rhythm. It's found all over West Africa and even in parts of the Americas because it's an adaptation of an African rhythm. Let me play you the African rhythm that this comes from, the original African. It's this. Let me see if I can, let's see. I want to make it so you can hear it sharp. I'm playing this now similar to an Adowa or Agbaja. I'm playing it polyrhythmically. So this is going in fours, and this is a different rhythm. Now, what seems to have happened is when the slaves from Africa took this rhythm, ba, 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 which is found all over Africa, by the way. It's not just in Ghana, the whole South Africa, everywhere in Africa, this rhythm is found. In Ghana, we know it as Adowa and Agbaja, but if you go to Nigeria, it's called the Konkon rhythm and so on. The thing is, when the slaves were forced to play in Western time, they had to take this beat, which is played on a bell or a claves, wooden stick, ba, 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 ba. They couldn't play it in a polyrhythmic context. They were forced to play in 4 time, and it becomes ba, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So this seems to be what happened. And you might ask me, why did the Europeans force the slaves to change the rhythm of the bell? Because if you play polyrhythmic music, Africans can raise up their gods and their spirits and use that to give them the confidence to fight the slave masters. So when the slave masters wanted to destroy the slaves, they didn't only ban the drums, because the drums can signal between rebels. You know, you can drum language, talking drums. But also because when you drum in polyrhythmic time, it can be used for African religious purposes. And the Europeans wanted to drive out the African religion from Africans, substitute with Christianity so they could tame them. So they allowed the Africans to put this beat into a 4/4, which is a sort of a typical European, it's found in European popular music, art music, church music, and so on. But the thing is, it still has an African ingredient, because this ba, 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 which you now call jammer, the jammer beat, it contains certain, it's not polyrhythmic, but it still contains African features, offbeats and syncopations. So when the West Indians brought this rhythm to Ghana, the Ghanaians recognized it as something African. So that was the first rhythm that was put into Highlife. Even before the word Highlife was invented, the early forms of Highlife, Osibisaba and Adaha, used that rhythm. But then, of course, the Ghanaians realized that they didn't have to just use the West Indian type of rhythm, they could use their own rhythms. So they took one which is found, for instance, in Sitchi music, ga, 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 ga. And they brought that into, so that's a traditional Ghanaian rhythm that they brought into the Highlife rhythm. And here's, let me play you the third one. The third one, Charles, is a type of Adowa. Now, if I can play the Adowa like this, and if I play the other beat, the polyrhythmic beat, but you can, what the Highlife musicians use is they didn't use all of the 5, I think Adowa is 1, isn't it 5 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's 5 beats. They just use 3 of them. Instead of playing, they just went. Now that sounds like the other rhythm I played. The other one was ga, ga. I call it a triple offbeat, just as an expression to name it. Ga, ga. And this one is also ga, 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 but it's played in 6/8 time. So it's like an Adowa rhythm. So the Highlife drew on those 3 rhythms principally, but sometimes they even use the Agbaja as well, and sometimes they use mambo rhythms. I mean, they can use different rhythms, but the basic Ghanaian ones is what you today call the jammer beat. Then the typical Ghanaian homegrown Highlife beat, 3 beats, 3 offbeats, and then 3 offbeats used in 6/8 time, or even using the full Adowa. That's the rhythmic background. But but you can also have reggae Highlife. You can have mambo, rumba Highlife, and so on, and calypso Highlife. But those are the rock bottom rhythms. And then in terms of the scales that they use, particularly the guitar bands use the modal scale. They don't use the Western 1/4/5 harmonies, which were introduced through missionaries and so on. So a lot of the dance bands tend to use the 1/4/5 and even more complex jazz chords. But some of the Highlife bands, particularly if you take things like a Donson, Sitchi Highlife, a Can Blues, and so on, they just move. I'll show you what they do. This is typical Akan style of playing music. You see, Western music, you will go from, let's say I was playing in C. C, F, G. That's 1, 4, 5. Then you base your music on this with some more chords in between if you wish. But the African way is just to use 2 chords which act as tone centers. For instance, I can do it like this. This is an F and this is a G, which is a tone apart. So the Akans like to take 2 notes and create a tone center, and you rotate between the 2. You don't go 1, 4, 5. You just go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So it sounds like this. And then you can rhythmatize it any way you like. And a lot of traditional Akan music is based on this. So this went more into the guitar bands, this modal style of playing. So dance bands do use it, and they even use 6/8 rhythms, the polyrhythms occasionally, but it tends to be more towards the guitar bands. I mean, my best definition of Highlife is to say that it was a music that was created in Ghana out of a combination of African, Western, and Black American elements, or of music of the Black Americas and Caribbean. And it comes in various packages and has become an umbrella term in Ghana for all its popular music. So, you know, from the word Highlife in the context of the rich, elite dance orchestras, it became an umbrella term. So you can play guitar band Highlife, even though originally it was called Osabisaba. Or you can have hip-hop Highlife, hip life, or gospel Highlife. So it's become a general term, but and also it's found in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, they've added Igbo and Yoruba and Edo elements into Highlife making. So if you listen to Nigerian Highlife, they may not use the Ghanaian rhythms. They might have their own distinct Igbo rhythms. But so you can't actually define, there's not a rock solid definition of Highlife. That's what I'm trying to get. Just like you're asking me a rock solid definition of jazz. Look, have you heard these guys, just to give you one example, have you heard of a band called the Cavemen? Well, there you are. I mean, look what's happening in Nigeria. They've taken Igbo Highlife and developed it to a different level. And they're going much further than the Ghanaians like Kofi Kinata and Bisakidi and all these guys. You see, when they took the Highlife and put it into their contemporary Highlife, they took fragments of a guitar tune. What these guys, the Cavemen, are doing, they're taking the whole Igbo guitar style, which is very similar to the Ghanaian one actually. They're taking the whole of it, plus the bass. They're not taking samples of little bits and pieces of somebody's song or something. They're developing it, and then they're even overlaying other sounds on top of it. So that means that Highlife is evolving. And we also have Pat Thomas and Kwame Yebwa, and we have Ambule. They are also still maintaining the Highlife abroad. But the Nigerians have done something very interesting, which I don't see yet in Ghana, where you take the whole guitar band style of Highlife, not the dance band, but the guitar band, and uplift it or change it into a techno music, but do it correctly. Because, I mean, remember the song by Bisakidi, Brother, Brother. You remember what he did in there? He picked a typical guitar band, I don't know, sample. I don't even know which band he got this thing, but it's very distinctive. But he didn't get a guitarist to play it. He just looped it and used it occasionally. But you know, those Highlife guitarists were geniuses. I mean, we still have a few of them left in Ghana. For instance, this guy, he's an Nzima guy. I've forgotten his name now. I mean, we still have those people that, you see, when you're playing a Highlife guitar, it's like jazz. It's improvised. Who? Yes, Akablade. I mean, these guys, when they're playing the Highlife, they just play a few seconds and then they loop it. Continuous solos, if they want to. Some of these guitarists can play continuous solos, and the bass guitar is also playing a solo, And in the guitar band tradition, I didn't mention this, but the guitar band's bass is different from the dance band bass, in that the guitar band bass is often played like a drum, percussively. So there's a relationship between the Highlife guitar playing, let's say, lead or second lead, because you know there's usually more than one guitar, and the bass. And the cavemen seem to have maintained that. Whereas in what we've done in Ghana with contemporary Highlife is we've just picked and chose a few bits and pieces from Highlife. And so I'm waiting for a Ghanaian band to follow the model of the cavemen, because they really have taken Highlife to a new level. But then, as I met, a Nigerian professor told me that there are 17 distinct varieties of Highlife in Nigeria now. I'm not sure if we can count that in Ghana. But then, of course, you counter with that, Nigeria is a much bigger country. Fair enough. So it's bound to have a richer Highlife scene than Ghana, because it's, what, 5 times as big or whatever. But still, I mean, it should be recognized where the Highlife came from. That, or they should, I think many of them do recognize that Ghanaians contributed greatly, but there's a lot of the youth now in Nigeria who deny that Ghana had anything to do with their Highlife. And it's a pity, because it's always good to get who created what and where did things come from. You know, I'm an archaeologist, a historian, so I always want to know where things come from, even though maybe the younger generation doesn't feel this is important.